is from Princeton University. It's my pleasure to introduce Anais Holgado Lage.
Very good.
Did I get it?
Yeah. Hi, thank you so much. As he said, I'm Anais Holgado Lage. I come from Princeton, but actually the work that I'm going to present today, it was all conducted in the University of Salamanca, Spain, where I finished my dissertation last year. So, yes, finally. So this is not the prototypical talk in the sense that I'm not really going to talk about the experiments I conducted while doing this project, or like the the statistics and results and stuff like that. I'm just going to do like a broad presentation on what I did and all the difficulties that I encountered while doing this, and what I think the future of this project is and what applications it can have. And well, it's still not completely finalized, so there is room for improvement. So any suggestion, an idea, or anything that you have, you'll be more than welcome. So I'm going to talk about the goal of this project. Like it's a dictionary, as you could see in the title of the presentation, and why I did this dictionary. Some of the previous work on discourse markers, and Spanish as a second language, and lexicography, which are the three subfields that are combined in this project. The methodology, like how I wrote this dictionary, and how it finally, after writing it, how it looks more or less, yeah. And then what to do in the future and what we can do with this dictionary. So the goal of this project was to create a resource for students of Spanish or of any language, where they can find all the discourse markers that we native speakers use in everyday language. The first thing would be to define what a discourse marker is. I'm sure some people are familiar with this concept, but I spend my life just explaining what these discourse markers are, so I'll do it again. Chiffring defined as sequentially dependent elements which bracket units of talk. So they're the expressions we use in the language, in any language, to guide our speech and make it easier for the listeners to infer our intentions, just in a way. So I really like the cover of the discourse markers by Chiffring, because it has some of them in English, like well, because. So sometimes they use combined sentences, like the coordinate sentences. Sometimes they use I mean, or oh, or anything. And this is more or less what the definition of discourse markers is, but this definition has been broadened, and right now the authors include more and more. Like I personally include a lot more than what it's in here, because it's like when you start including one, you're like, oh well, but then you can include okay, and then you can include a lot of other markers in there. So it's not exactly the same for every author what a discourse marker is, but more or less this is the accepted definition. So just to have an idea of what this dictionary is, it has more than 800 entries of discourse markers, all in Spanish, and the most important thing while creating it was to remember that I was writing this dictionary for a student of Spanish, not for my colleagues in linguistics, for somebody that was trying to learn the language and trying to use the language in a closer way to a native speaker. So that was always something that I kept in mind. So my definitions try to be very simple. I use a lot of examples. Sometimes the corpus didn't have the example that I wanted to show exactly how the discourse marker was, so I had to create the example. So everything to make it easier for the user to understand what's going on. They are also gathered by level. I'll explain this a little more later. And they also have a main function. All of them has like a main function, so that you see it and you're like, oh, this marker expresses doubt, or this marker only expresses that you want a continuation of the conversation, like or right, or stuff like that. So this is the first dictionary of discourse markers designed to be used by non-native speakers on the language, and it's a combination of 3 different subfields in linguistics. lexicography, creation of dictionaries, obviously, discourse analysis, specifically discourse markers, and Spanish as a second language. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what has been done before. In Spanish, we don't have a combination of these three linguistic subfields together until me, I guess. But there are definitely examples of two of these subfields combined, all of them. So first of all, there are definitely studies in Spanish as a second language and dictionaries. So there are dictionaries, a lot of them, in every language, designed for the students of the language. There are dictionaries like that in English, in Spanish, in all of the languages. So three of the most recent ones in Spanish is González, Maldonado, and Seco. The problem with these dictionaries is that they don't emphasize the discourse. They don't do, sometimes they don't even have some of the discourse markers because they're complicated, they're hard to, like, where do you put this one? Like, no me digas, where do you put that one? And in digas, in me, oh my God. So sometimes these dictionaries don't have all the discourse information that we would like. We do have studies in discourse markers and dictionaries, especially in Spain, but right now in all the Spanish-speaking world, discourse markers are in like a boom, like a lot of people are studying them, and they are dictionaries in Spanish that collect a lot of discourse markers. The one by Brief is online. It's called Diccionario de Partículas Discursivas de Español. Fuentes Rodriguez released one very recently with a lot of them. It's pretty good. And then Santos Rios has one that has everything that you can imagine about any discourse marker particle. It's crazy. There's no way to understand it. So it definitely, they don't work for students of Spanish because it would be really, really hard for them to understand what's going on. They have a lot of linguistics information, pragmatic information, things that if you're a student and you encounter an expression and you don't know where to find it and you go to any of these dictionaries, good luck. Like it will be really, really hard to understand what's going on. And finally, very, very recently, they're starting to study discourse markers in Spanish as a second language. This is an understudied field, how to teach discourse markers in different languages, how to teach them successfully, how important it is to learn discourse markers when you're studying a second language. So this is something that is starting to be studied now. And Marty Sanchez works a lot in this and like, okay, these are the discourse markers, let's make it easier for students to learn them. And it's a starting point for future work, and we hope to see more and more work on discourse markers in Spanish as a second language. So my dictionary combines all of these things into one thing, okay, more or less. So I asked some questions myself when I was creating the dictionary. It was not easy because, first of all, I was like, what discourse markers do I include? Do I include all the discourse markers? Do I make a selection of the most important ones? But if my goal was that the students could actually use this tool, I wanted to include as many as possible. You know, I had to leave out some of them, the ones that were not used very commonly in the language, or the ones that, I don't know, there were like a whole of list that I had to, for reasons to include or not include. But it was really hard to make the list of discourse markers. I'm still, sometimes I find one that I'm like, oh, maybe I should have included this one. And sometimes I'm like, oh, why did I put this one in the dictionary? Nobody uses it. But more or less, I've been happy because every time I'm like, oh, did I put this one? Yeah, I did. So yeah, sometimes I lost count of what it put. It was a 5-year long project. So what do we include in each entry? There are many times that discourse markers have this connotation or little meaning that is like, do we include this? Is this useful for students? And that was a one-to-one case. Like in pues, for example, I had to include a lot of different meanings, a lot of information, because pues is like incredibly complex. Other times I tried to like keep it a little simpler, and when it had like two very similar meanings, I tried to summarize it and then explain a little bit the different connotations of the two meanings. So that was difficult to do too. What we did I did consider that some things were important, like examples were like, this has to be in here. So, and then I really wanted to include all the discourse markers from all the speaking Spanish countries, but that was really impossible because it was, for time reason, I was trying to finish this in a normal dissertation kind of time frame. And so that's something that I would like to do in the future, to include more and more discourse markers from other countries. And maybe because this was my own project, I couldn't have collaborators from other countries, but maybe in the future I would like to have people being like, oh, well, in Argentina we use this and this and this for acceptance, and try to incorporate those into the dictionary. And then what more things that I'll talk about later we would like to include in the future. Well, the definition was really hard. I wrote an article about how difficult it was to define these expressions and how their grammatical expressions are harder to define than just lexical expressions. But reading and researching, I found out that keeping it simple was probably the best thing. And then later in the entry, I have information that the students would find useful. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit about the things that are in each entry and just show one entry of the dictionary. Item and type of word. Type of word, I'm not even sure if it was that good to include, but I did. It's there. I don't know if students of Spanish would like to know if it's a not verb or a conjunction, but for now it's there. I included some labels like formal, informal, and vulgar. We have a lot of bad words in the dictionaries that would be more appealing for the students, I think. Yeah, we know how they are. Oral speech versus written speech, if it's more common in the oral speech or in the written speech. And also if a discourse marker was not very common, but I still thought that it needed to be there because there were really no alternatives, I would just say this is not a very common one. The definition, as I said, it was really hard to define sometimes, but we did it by usage, like the most important use, that would be the definition. Examples to show how the expression works, usually from corpus, and sometimes I had to create them. This section called Use and Culture, which is the section where I would explain, if the definition was too simple, I would explain more about the discourse marker and how it works in this section. So like verb tense, agreement, location in the sentence. I'll show in the example that I'm going to show. You'll see a little bit of that. Similar discourse markers, which a very important thing to remember, that there are really not true synonyms in discourse markers. If there are two discourse markers to say the same, it's because there is a slight difference. It might be the context. It might be just that one is a little more ironic. It can be anything, but there is really, like, there are studies about two discourse markers that are really similar, and they always conclude that there is a slight difference. So I have similar, but they're not synonyms. They're usually not interchangeable. I organized the whole discourse markers in 3 levels based on the Plan Curricular del Instituto Cervantes, which did a lot of the work for me. And then the function. What is the main function of this expression? So we'll see here. So I have the expression a lo mejor, which means maybe, one of the many maybes that we have. It's definitely informal, it's oral, and it expresses doubt. There are some of the examples. And then in this section, I talk about that it usually requires indicative, which is important because other markers of doubt require the subjunctive. So it's important for the student to know that you can use a lo mejor with indicative and you'll be fine. And how it's important in Spain. Then I had some similar ones. As you can see, they're definitely not synonyms. And it's intermediate and it's duda. Oh, that shouldn't be here. That was all the dictionaries that had this. In the thesis, I have all the information about every author that mentions this marker. So let's talk very briefly about what applications this has. Okay, because I have to finish. It's definitely a dictionary that the students might be interested in because it includes slang and words that are not in other dictionaries. And also they can use it as a learning tool. They can go to the level and be like, okay, so I'm an intermediate. Do I know these markers? Yes, no. And learn all the similar ones. It could be a good complement in the classroom for teachers to use, like, because when they explain it, they can be used. I have experiments when the students use this dictionary as a tool, like as something they can just look at when they're doing an activity on discourse markers, and it can help them a lot. So it can definitely be used in the classroom. And of course, if you're a linguist and you're studying discourse markers, you can definitely get some information or ideas from here. So finally, what I would like to do in the future is I would really like to include more discourse markers from Latin America and make a Pan-Hispanic dictionary, create some activities that could be complementing the dictionary for the classroom. Because in Spain, we only do paper dissertations. I would really like to adapt to the online format because it's definitely the future and what I should be. And also, I am already studying some markers that are not really studied because, as I said, pues has been really studied. There's like 20 articles on pues, but there are other markers that have been really not studied that much, so we should work on that. And that's it. Thank you so much. Questions and comments and suggestions? Yeah.
Thank you. Very interesting. I have a question. So you mentioned, and I totally agree with you, that there are not two of these words that are equal thematically.
Mm-hmm.
So there is, if they exist, there is a slight thematic difference between the two. And the question that I had to ask you, so what about a single item, a single discourse marker, and you finish the presentation with pues? And I think the equivalent maybe in English is well, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But let's stick to well. And depending on the intonation of well, so
Mm-hmm.
the single discourse marker can have several meanings. So how do you adjust your dictionary to reflect that for the learners?
Yeah.
Or where well could
That's a-
depending
yeah.
on well or well?
That's a very interesting question, and there are definitely some. So at first, there are not true synonyms. There's always something there, but there are definitely some discourse markers that are really, really similar. And maybe in a second language setting, they can be learned as synonyms, and it will be all fine. But in the other sense, in the sense of one discourse marker that have a lot of meanings, I talk about the meanings. Like I say, pues, one, it means this, it means that, 2, 3, it means that. And I talk about the intonation sometimes. I say if it's, but the problem is that as it was in paper, there was nothing I could do. So one of the things that I would like to do is do like recordings and be like, okay, have a native speaker saying a sentence when pues means, because pues means like a bazillion different things. It can be like, pues no, or pues ven, okay, they're just different. So having somebody recording it and seeing the different intonation, because it's completely true that a discourse marker can have two different meanings, and it can be just based on intonation, and of course context, but sometimes intonation. Yeah.
Regarding this issue of synonymy, I'm thinking of two particular types of synonymy, sort of a case like por tanto, por lo tanto, or a case like de todos modos, de todas formas. Like how much of that detail goes into?
So one of the goals, here's a good question too. One of the goals was to keep it simple. So sometimes you had to be like, okay, I'm gonna keep it simple and maybe not get into too much detail. So for example, por lo tanto and por tanto, I have them together. It's just the same thing. It's like, and I say por tanto, por lo tanto, and then I explain like you can use both. Sometimes we use this one, or it's like quizá or quizás. You know, like there are different things, and it's like, okay, maybe in some countries use more quizá, and in some countries with more quizás, but these different things on the todos los modos, de todas las formas, those I have them. Sometimes I had to have them as synonyms, and maybe you don't use exactly in the same context por tanto and por lo tanto and de todas maneras and de todas formas, but sometimes you have to be like, okay, if you're a student, do you really need to know when do you use de todos modos or todas formas, or is more important to just learn that they both mean anyway? So specifically in those two cases, I tried to keep it simple for the students. But yeah, it was hard. It was like sometimes I had no idea what to do. Like, do I put 2, 1? Yeah. Good, thank you.
How did you select like what's considered simple for the students, or what's considered? And I know that you said that like what's most common, but sometimes there's really common discourse markers that are not that simple. So how did you?
Yeah. Well, it was kind of like a one-to-one case basis. So I would look in corpus and I would be like, what is, like, if they're used a lot or if they're not used a lot. And the complexity sometimes it was based on like outside things, like does it have a variation or like tools that is completely fixed. And sometimes it was just a one-to-one basis. Like if you have looked in the corpus and there was really not a lot of things and it felt like the discourse marker was going to bring more problems than anything else. Sometimes I would include it, but I tried to include as much as possible.
And then one last question. I know that you said that they're organized like a beginner, intermediate, advanced. Are they by sections or are they like, how did you organize that?
What do you mean by sections?
So in the discourse markers, so did you incorporate like, this is the list of all the beginner
Yes.
ones? This is
At the end of the dictionary. So each discourse marker has initial, intermedio, or advanced in the entry. But then at the end, you have a list of all the discourse markers by beginner, by intermediate, or by advanced level. So you can see them all together. And there were some ones that were really hard to include in one because the sources that I used for that had a lot of markers, but they didn't have them all. So sometimes it was really hard to incorporate it to one or the other. But yeah.
great project.
Yeah, thank you.
I agree, a wonderful project.
Thank you.
I lived in San Diego for a long time, non-native speaker of Spanish, obviously. But I would hear things, and spent a lot of time in Baja as a consequence, and I would hear this "andale pues." In San Diego, it seemed to mean one thing, but in Baja, even in Tijuana, just across the border,
Yeah.
it seemed to be really dismissive, like whatever.
Yeah.
But it was much more collegial in San Diego. I don't know if you guys
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Could you tease that apart for me a little bit? Because I would ask people,
Yeah.
what does that mean? And they're like, it means,
So-
you know, whatever.
So andale is one of the ones that I have in the dictionary, but it's one of the ones that we don't use at all in Spain, so I'm not familiar with it. So it's one of the ones that I would like to have people from different places telling me exactly what it means so that I can complete the entry and make sure I'm saying it right. But I will give you another example that I'm studying right now. There's this marker which is ni hablar. Are you guys familiar with the ones that speak Spanish? Ni hablar. What does it mean? Yeah, okay. It means, traditionally means no way, don't even think about it, what you're talking about. Well, I found out very recently that in the Buenos Aires area, it means yes, of course, which is the opposite. So, so right now, I'm working on like the extent of that meaning and be like, oh my God, so it's just the opposite. If you're a student and you start using ni hablar, like if you ask somebody in Argentina, like you want to go on vacation and they're like ni hablar, you're going to be like, oh my God, they don't want to go on vacation with me. And what they're saying is like, yes, of course. So this is important to incorporate those differences. And if there is one marker that has two different meanings in two different areas, I would love to to do that. But especially with andale pues, I don't know yet. I will have to research
check
that.
with these guys.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we want to make sure that we give Dr. Eric a few minutes to set up. That was really interesting. Great
Thank
project.
you.
Thanks, Max. That's really cool.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you're a very engaging and energetic speaker.
You like it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, very much. I like your style.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll start Dr. Eric's presentation in just about 2 minutes. We'll give him a couple minutes set up and start right on time. That's enough time.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, we all do. How you doing?
If it's not, I got bigger problems.
Right. I will, I'm to introduce you, I will take this.